Part 2, Incessant Thoughts. Have you had enough yet? In the last video, we touched base on incessant thoughts and looked at a way to heal this issue. But sometimes without full knowledge of how all of this works, we can be left seeing the healing modalities as woo-woo. So in today's video, we will be talking about the actual addiction of those thoughts and how the addiction gets created. But before we get into all of that, let's take a look at how these incessant thoughts take place in abusive relationships. Incessant thoughts often occur when someone has experienced trauma. These thoughts can feel like they're stuck in a loop. They're reliving events, analyzing conversations, or obsessing over things that went wrong in their lives in the past a lot of times. It's like the mind keeps desperately trying to make sense of what happened, but instead of finding resolution, you get trapped in the cycle. So why does trauma lead to incessant thoughts? It is sometimes a survival mechanism. After trauma, the brain starts to be on high alert, looking for danger, and this hypervigilance can make it hard to let go of intrusive or anxious thoughts. It also has to do with unprocessed emotions. If the trauma hasn't been fully processed or understood, your mind keeps circling back to it, trying to find closure, which is why I keep saying give yourself the space. And I talk about journaling and understanding emotional literacy. And the last one that I want to mention is self-blame and shame. Victims often replay scenarios, wondering if they could have done something differently. And this blame can keep them stuck in a negative thought cycle. The impact of incessant thoughts. Mental exhaustion. Thinking nonstop about the trauma can drain you mentally, making it hard to focus or be present. Physical symptoms. The stress from rumination can lead to insomnia, headaches, or even digestive issues. Emotional toll. You might feel stuck in sadness, anger, or fear, which can spiral into anxiety or depression. And I'm just touching base here, but I'm going to go into depth on this later because it's important. Actually, it's detrimental, or it can be at least. So let's take a look at the connection between incessant thoughts, trauma bonding, and the role of hormones, so you can get a better understanding of what's happening to you. Trauma bonding and the addiction to incessant thoughts. In cases of trauma bonding, incessant thoughts are not merely a psychological pattern, they are deeply tied to the body's biochemical responses. The phenomenon is rooted in the hormonal and neurochemical reactions that occur during cycles of abuse and reconciliation, creating a powerful addictive loop. Good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. So let's take a look at the role of hormones in trauma bonding. Number one is cortisol, the stress hormone. During abusive or threatening situations, the body releases cortisol, the hormone responsible for the fight or flight response. High levels of cortisol heighten alertness and stress, creating a state of hypervigilance where the brain becomes focused on survival. And this intense state, it makes the mind fixate on the traumatic events, replaying them in an attempt to predict and avoid future harm. You're not doing this consciously here. This is all subconscious also. The second one is dopamine, the reward hormone. Following abusive episodes, abusers often employ tactics like love bombing, apologizing, or offering affection to regain control. And these moments of perceived relief or reward trigger the release of dopamine, a hormone associated with pleasure and satisfaction. That's why they call it dope. They call dope. The contrast between stress and reward intensifies the brain's association of the abuser with both danger and safety, reinforcing the trauma bond. Number three, oxytocin. The bonding hormone oxytocin, often called the love hormone, plays a significant role in forming emotional bonds. And even in toxic relationships, oxytocin is released during moments of closeness, intimacy, or physical touch. Sometimes it's just a statement in passing. And this bonding chemical creates a deep sense of connection and loyalty, even to someone who causes harm. So over time, this bond makes it really difficult for the victim to break away or see the relationship objectively. Lastly, I'd like to mention adrenaline, the excitement hormone. The unpredictability of abuse cycles oscillating between fear and relief activates the adrenaline. And this hormone enhances the intensity of emotional experiences, making the highs feel euphoric and the lows catastrophic. The brain becomes hooked on this roller coaster, mistaking the intensity of the relationship for genuine love or passion. So, why do these chemicals become addictive? The hormonal surge or surges created by the abuse reward cycle mimic the effects of addictive substances. Cortisol and adrenaline heighten the mind's focus on the abuser or the situation, while dopamine and oxytocin provide brief periods of relief and attachment. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to seek those hormonal hits, even if they're harmful. And this leads to the following patterns. Incessant thoughts as withdrawal. When separated from the abuser, the absence of these hormonal surges can feel like withdrawal from a drug. The brain, craving the familiar chemical pattern, drives incessant thoughts about the abuser, the relationship, or the trauma in an attempt to regain the hormonal balance it has grown accustomed to. So the body becomes the mind is the body is the mind. It's a chemical thing happening to you. The second pattern is cognitive fixation. The brain becomes stuck in a loop, replaying the abuse, the reconciliation, and every interaction in between. And this fixation enforces the trauma bond, keeping the victim mentally tethered to the abuser. And lastly, dependency. The victim's body and mind become chemically dependent on the abuse reward cycle, making it incredibly difficult to detach emotionally or physically from the abuser. Now let's look at that long-term impact. This one's important. This chemical addiction not only traps victims in unhealthy relationships, but also alters their brain chemistry. And over time, the repeated cortisol surges can damage the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning, and the amygdala, which controls or governs emotional regulation. And these changes make it even harder for victims to break free because their ability to think clearly, process emotions, and make decisions become impaired. This hormone interplay explains why incessant thoughts are not simply a matter of willpower. They are the result of a chemical cycle that feels almost impossible to break without intervention. And the long-term impact of incessant thoughts and trauma bonding doesn't just affect the brain, it also profoundly affects the physical body, largely because the body is stuck in survival mode. So here's a breakdown of how this manifests. When someone is in an abusive relationship, their body, it often operates in a near constant state of survival mode, also known as the fight or flight or freeze response. And this state, driven by incessant thoughts and the hormonal surges associated with trauma bonding, can have significant consequences for physical health. Constant cortisol release. In survival mode, the body is flooded with cortisol, the primary stress hormones. There's other stress hormones, but we're not going to get into that today. But while this is helpful in short bursts to handle immediate danger, chronic cortisol release wreaks havoc on the body. Let's look at the physical effects of this chronic cortisol. A weakened immune system. Prolonged exposure to cortisol suppresses immune function, making the body more vulnerable to infections, illnesses, and slower healing. Weight gain. Cortisol increases fat storage, especially in the abdominal area, and disrupts metabolism. Cardiovascular strain. The stress response raises blood pressure and heart rate, increasing the risk of heart disease, hypertension, and stroke over time. Muscle tension and pain. Continuous stress causes muscles to remain tight, leading to chronic pain, headaches, and tension-related issues like TMJ or back problems. And this is to name a few. And then we have the impact on the nervous system. You have your hypervigilance. The constant state of alertness overstimulates the nervous system, keeping the body in a heightened state of reactivity. And this can lead to sensory overload, difficulty learning, and trouble sleeping, insomnia. Then we have burnout of the parasympathetic nervous system. Over time, the body struggles to activate its rest and digest mode, which is necessary for recovering and healing. And this can result in physical exhaustion and this consistent feeling of being on edge, which leads to digestive problems. Survival mode directly affects the digestive system because the body prioritizes survival over digestion when under stress. It's a natural thing. Symptoms include chronic nausea or stomach aches, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, acid reflux or ulcers, appetite changes, whether you're overeating or undereating, again, to name a few, because the constant disruption to digestion can lead to nutrient deficiencies, further weakening the body over time. Inflammation and autoimmune disorders. Chronic stress from incessant thoughts and trauma bonding triggers widespread inflammation in the body, which has been linked to conditions like arthritis, diabetes, and chronic pain disorders. Then you have autoimmune issues. Stress can even trigger or worsen autoimmune disorders like lupus, Hashimoto's, MS, etc., where the immune system attacks healthy tissues. And we have sleep disruptions. Incessant thoughts often interfere with sleep, either by preventing it altogether or by causing restless, fragmented sleep. And poor sleep, it affects cognitive function, impaired memory, concentration, and decision-making. Sleep is when the body repairs itself, and the lack of it weakens muscles, bones, and organs over time. Hormone imbalances. Sleep disruption interferes with hormones that regulate hunger, stress, and mood. Cardiovascular and metabolic damage, heart problems. The constant surge of adrenaline and cortisol places strain on the heart, increasing the risk of heart attacks and arrhythmias. Insulin resistance. Chronic stress hormones disrupt blood sugar levels, which can lead to insulin resistance and eventually type 2 diabetes. Reproductive health. You have hormonal disruption. Stress affects reproductive hormones, causing irregular menstrual cycles, fertility issues, or sexual dysfunction in both men and women. There's pregnancy risks for those in abusive relationships during pregnancy. Stress increases the risk of complications, including preterm labor and low birth weight. And the last one, number 8, is exhaustion and adrenal fatigue. You have this energy depletion. The constant activation of survival mode drains the body's energy reserves. And over time, this can lead to adrenal fatigue, where the adrenal glands struggle to produce enough hormones to keep up with the body's demands, leaving the victim feeling chronically fatigued and unable to recover. Survival mode creates a vicious cycle between the body and mind. The incessant thoughts keep the body in a state of stress. The physical symptoms caused by stress, pain, exhaustion, illness, reinforce the mental focus on the trauma, perpetuating the cycle. Survival mode during an abusive relationship isn't just mental, it's a full body experience. The incessant thoughts are a symptom of the body trying to protect itself, but when prolonged, they wear the body down. And over time, the physical toll can lead to chronic illness, systemic inflammation, and long-term health conditions that persist even after the abuse ends. This is why understanding the mind-body connection in trauma bonding is so important. It shows how deeply intertwined our emotional and physical health truly are. I am a big fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, and he states that if your mind was able to create these illnesses and imbalances in the body, then that same mind can create homeostasis. He also states that if, and I quote, if a person consciously chooses to not think about frustrated thoughts or anger or fearful thoughts, they no longer activate these emotions. And over a period of time, their biology starts to change. And because of the addictions, the body's addictions, these hormones, they'll still fight for their lives, right? So they naturally activate those same hormonal centers that make them feel those emotions. And if they discourage that energy or put a brake on it every time it happens, that energy naturally moves into the heart. The heart is the creative center. And when the heart starts beating coherently rather than incoherently, like when it's beating erratically during stress with frustration and resentment, the heart now has all this energy and it begins to inform the brain. It resets the brain in the limbic brain, that part of the brain that controls emotions. It tells the brain that the trauma is over, the past is over. Pretty powerful stuff. It tells the brain to create. And you do that by calming the mind down, by thinking good thoughts. And if you can't think happy thoughts in certain hectic moments, I know what that's like. What you do in those moments is you focus on your breath, or you focus on just the sound of an air conditioner. Whatever you can do to disconnect the emotion, discourage the thoughts from coming in. And if you can do that for a period of time, you can upregulate genes rather than downregulate with the low vibrational thoughts. And when you can trade those emotions for better emotions like peace, joy, and gratitude, you're signaling genes ahead of your environment, and the body is literally changing. And if you could do that for 7 days in a row, you would see massive changes. And this is from the mouth of Dr. Joe Dispenza. So give yourself the space. Another way that you can change your thoughts to better thoughts is by listening to Abraham Hicks. Type it in on YouTube if you don't know her and just listen. She'll bring you back into a good space. Where there's a will, there's a way. And for those who are still listening, you obviously have the will. We were taught that we were powerless so that others could have dominance over us. Remember, that was all a lie. And they lied because they knew that we were powerful. So it's time for us to remember that. Take care, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.